had done with others. And I said, well, yes, because when I said yes, we have some people right now looking at ways in which, in fact, to reduce the cost of the Scarborough Subway, or to at least see if the cost, as stated, is the the right numbers. I think you all know that work is being done. And I said, so anybody who has any ideas on how we might do these things differently, and it was put to me on the basis that it actually could even save some money. So it just shows you that the perspective you present is that it would cost more. I was told it might cost less, and so my job really is, I think, to say, you know what? If somebody has an idea as to how we can build a subway or any other undertaking better, and they think it's going to be better for the residents and better for the taxpayers and better for the transit users, then I think it's my responsibility to make sure that we have access to that information so that professionals can consider it. And that's what I said that I'd be happy to do, was to make sure that this proposal, and I'm not even familiar entirely with what it is, would be taken into account, and that the gentleman who was leading that particular process would have an opportunity to be heard by me and by the professionals. And so that's what we're doing.
Do you think this, just to follow up quickly, do you think this maybe has an opportunity, though, to sort of balloon out of control, where you've got all kinds of competing ideas, and now you've got two politicians who have been advocating for a subway, as you have now, suggesting that some of the plans we have in front of us are not good enough now that we're moving forward with the subway, and that we should entertain sort of these individual community concerns and realign an entire billions-dollar plan?
Well, I think there are always different ways of characterizing things. I would characterize what we're in the process of doing right now as the responsible thing to do, because we are in the process of having a professional, an objective professional, examine the cost numbers that were presented for the Scarborough Subway in order to determine, how much we can rely on those numbers. And I would think that the responsible way to go about that is to listen to anybody who has an idea. I'm obviously more interested in the ideas that lead to a reduced cost, because the more you can get things done for the public for less money, the more I would be seen to be doing my job. But having said all that, I just see it as exactly the kind of due diligence that the citizens of Toronto have the right to expect from their mayor and from their city government and from their transit commission and everybody else, to look at every idea you possibly can that's put forward and try and decide if there's a better way and hopefully a less expensive way to do something. So again, as you know with me, and on this subject in particular, which it is your perfect right to ask me about day after day, I will always try to look, if it's feasible to do so, at the glass as being half full instead of half empty, and look at this as an opportunity that's presenting itself to possibly do a subway that I'm committed to doing on a cheaper basis and a better basis, as opposed to looking at it in any other way.
Mayor Tory, about the safety measures for cyclists and pedestrians announced today, is the city maybe looking at separate signals as well, something similar to like a left-hand turn for cyclists, or maybe some ideas that would put the onus on pedestrians? Because a few of the fatal collisions that have recently occurred involve jaywalking.
I will only say this to you. I have come back because I've been out looking at the Bloor Street bike lanes, talking to businesses, watching them in action and so on. And it was interesting because when I went to visit, I went out principally to visit, it turns out I visited 20 businesses on Bloor Street, just to ask them what was going on in their lives since the bike lanes had been installed. And they actually didn't say much in the context of, in that group. Now, I know there's another group in Koreatown who I will visit, who said the impact on their business has been much greater in a negative way. But what they wanted to talk to me about wasn't so much the impact on their business, but they wanted to talk about different concerns they had about safety. And I don't want to put it the way that you did, just in asking the question about a particular group. I will only say this. The people who I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of people just walking down the street about the Bloor bike lanes as well, and that's just one place in the city, have expressed concerns on all sides. They've said that there are things we have to do to make it safer and easier for drivers who now find, for example, sometimes when they're making a turn they can't see properly. There are instances in which pedestrians feel themselves very vulnerable because of the way in which different intersections are reconfigured because of different things we've done. There are instances, of course, in which cyclists still feel vulnerable. And so I think the job that I've taken to heart, and I'm now, I think, to the point of aggravating our professional transportation staff, of calling them regularly with ideas that I have, not that I've made up, but that I've either read about or people have suggested to me and say, could we do this? Could we look into this? And so I will say this, they are doing, again, what I think they should do, which is they're taking all of these ideas and others they're getting from other cities and others they're getting on their own, and we're looking at doing a whole host of things. There's hardly a day goes by where we're not looking at some things we could do in intersections or along the streets to make it safer for everybody. And I don't think it's fair, frankly, to put the onus on pedestrians. we've learned from the deployment of police officers, for example, and we've learned many things from that pilot project, which is coming to an end, the second phase of it this week, that the management of pedestrian traffic when there are huge numbers of pedestrians can be very helpful in terms of everybody being safe and keeping on the move. And that's not to sort of say it was anybody's fault that they weren't before. It was just the way it was. It was a bit chaotic. And so we're learning from all of this, and our job is to make everybody safe and not to sort of say, well, one group deserves to be sort of chastised or to be held responsible. As I've said many times, in the 21st century, the task of the government and the task of all the people involved, cyclists, pedestrians, drivers, neighbors, business people, is to learn how to share the public space, including transportation space, in a safe way and in a fair way. And that's what I see my job as, to sort of oversee that process.
Are one of the suggestions that you've heard from the people that you've spoken with, though, separate signal?
I've heard a number of variations on the theme of something that's slightly different than a scramble intersection, but actually has different phases to the movement of people and cars and bikes. And so I've heard a number of options, and I've actually put all those to the transportation authorities and said to them, can you please tell me, have we ever tried this before? Have they tried it somewhere else? So they're in the stage right now of looking at a number of things that have to do with signals and who moves when. So the answer to that is yes, but not narrowed down exclusively to the kind you suggested. There are a number of different things, and they're taking a look.
Mayor Tory, you referred to the U.S. election as immensely disturbing and said a lot of it has to do, because part of it has to do with who belongs and who doesn't. In Canada, we're seeing sort of similar tropes around immigration deployed by Kelly Leach in the conservative leadership campaign. Do you have similar concerns there?
I would only say that I think that Canada's done a very good job of looking at the kind of criteria of people that we think are going to succeed best in the country, that are going to, that's really what we want in the end, is people who can come here and make a success of their lives based on their, more so than anything else, their skill set, their education, their ambitions for themselves. And I think we've done very well, and I think history's proven that. And I see no reason why we need to particularly change the model that's worked so well for us. If you look back at all the generations I referred to and ones before that in the 50s and 40s and way back, I mean, I think the system we've employed and the way in which we, sort of sort out one person from another who might want to come here, that has worked fine, and that the country is, I think, at peace with itself in the context that we're getting along well together. People are succeeding here, by and large. There are some who end up inadvertently left behind, and those are the people to whom I was directing a number of my comments. But to me, there are not a lot of sort of big failings of our system that I would point to, and I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have a polarized discussion going on here about immigration or about the contribution that immigrants have made, past, present, or future.
A couple more questions if there are any.
The chair of the Police Services Board, Amy Pringle, is actively fundraising for Ms. Leach. Do you feel that complicates the board's efforts to build trust in policing with racialized immigrants communities?
I think most people wouldn't be aware of what Mr. Pringle is doing, including the fact that he's raised money for a lot of things like CANFAR to help with AIDS research, and Ryerson University, and sponsored Syrian refugee families, and raised money for that. I think that Mr. Pringle should be judged by his actions as chair of the Police Services Board first and foremost, and I think what he's done there is done a lot on first steps related to the reform of how we police the city, with a specific view to increasing and enhancing trust in the police, which had suffered some blows. And I think that I'm happy that he's helping us to take some steps forward in that regard. We have a lot left to do in terms of people feeling that the police are carrying on their duties in a way that is entirely satisfactory to them, but we're working at that every day, and he's at the lead of that, and I'm happy that he's there.
Big victory for Toronto FC last night. Your thoughts on that? Toronto FC in the playoffs?
Well, Toronto FC, they went through a long playoff drought, as our teams often have done, and they sort of ended the drought last year, but now they had a chance to win a playoff game at home. They won it big, and they've gone to the next round, which is also a first, and I'm proud of that. And I've said before, not only are we proud of these teams because they're ours, but I think it does positively affect the psychology of the city, which in turn leads to everything as simple as the mood people have when they go to work in the morning, or the enthusiasm with which they approach their jobs. It's just a truth that sports, among other things, has an impact on how people feel about themselves and about the city. And so to the extent our sports teams are doing well, we can be proud of them, and they're helping to create a more positive environment for a city that I think has got a lot to feel positive about right now.
The next step there is they'll be hosting a game at BMO Field Sunday against New York City. Are you going to be there? Any bets? Have you talk to your counterpart in New York?
I haven't had time to make plans yet. As you know, I'm not big on sort of making these bets all the time. I wouldn't be the one that would be likely doing that unless you get right down to the last round. And so I think I was sort of cajoled into one bet on the early rounds of the baseball playoffs this year, and I'm not sure whether, frankly, the mayor of Arlington ever paid off by wearing the Blue Jays jersey in his city. But I will await, in my own case, in terms of proactively trying to set up a bet, the FC making it, as I'm confident they can, to the last round, and we'll see what happens after that.
Mayor Tory, can you talk a little bit about the Richmond and Yonge road closure and any advice you might have for the drivers in the area?
Well, what we try to do, first and foremost, on the basis that this is work that has to be done. It's not simply sort of let's repave a little part of a hole that was dug up to do something. It's a wholesale replacement of streetcar tracks. It's repaving. It's, in some cases, taking the very roadbed and rebuilding it. And so it is actually less disruptive to take 4 whole days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and do the work than it would be to have it disrupted for weeks on end, especially when you're dealing with an intersection that has 4-way traffic by definition. And so I just think this is the right and sensible thing to do. If you said, well, is there a better time to do it? I suppose you could talk about doing it sort of Boxing Day week on the theory that there might be less traffic, but that's during winter season. So, you know, I ask all these questions. Trust me. I want the people to know that I ask every one of these questions. Is this the right season? Is this the only time? Do you have to close the whole intersection? Do you have to close it for this long? I was at a meeting yesterday of the Transportation Coordination Committee where we had this discussion not about Yonge and Richmond. We had it a while ago. But I ask all these questions all the time because I think it's my job to do so. And I think in the case of Yonge and Richmond, I was certainly satisfied this was the best of a number of all somewhat unattractive alternatives as to how to get this work done. Well, I would say, you know, one thing we've been trying to do much better is communicate the fact this is coming and then communicate it's happening. And I would just say to people the best answer would be if you could possibly use public transportation those days or not come downtown if Richmond and Bay are a key, or Yonge are a key part of your routing, because it does impact traffic on other streets as well. But I would say other than that, I mean, people just have to do some planning. It's 2 work days, you know, rush hour days, and then 2 weekend days. And it's just work. In the past, oftentimes, the answer would have been, well, let's just postpone that. Maybe we just won't do that at all this year, and we'll even save some money. And I look at that and see the toll that has extracted from this city, where some of the road beds are so broken down from the fact that we've left them so long that it costs us much, much more in money and time to fix them. And I just won't be presiding over that sort of administration. We've got to make these investments. We've got to do this work. We have to sort of deal with the fact that it's going to cause some inconvenience, unfortunately, and just try to do it in the best way we can. And that's what I've been trying to do, including, as you know, on a great number of contracts, about 20%, actually spending more money to get it done faster so that we'll minimize the disruption.